Racist real estate agent refuses to sell to black family, then faces shocking consequences. As the Johnson family stood outside their dream home, their excitement quickly turned to disbelief when the real estate agent, Mr. Stevens, coldly declared, "This house isn't for people like you." The weight of his words hung in the air, igniting a fire of determination within them. Little did he know, the tides of karma were about to turn in a way he could never have imagined. Here's a detailed introduction to the black family that can set the stage for the rest of your story. This section will establish their background, aspirations, and the emotional stakes involved, aiming for around 1,000 words. The Johnson family had always dreamed of owning their own home. For years, they lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a bustling part of the city, where the sounds of honking cars and chatter from neighbors became a constant backdrop to their lives. The apartment was filled with memories, birthday celebrations, family dinners, and late-night conversations that echoed against the walls. However, it also served as a reminder of their limitations and the struggles they faced as a black family trying to find their place in a society that often felt hostile. Marcus Johnson, the family patriarch, was a hard-working mechanic who had dedicated over a decade to building a successful career. He poured his heart into every vehicle he repaired, taking pride in the quality of his work. With grease-stained hands and a warm smile, Marcus was well-liked in his community. He often helped his neighbors with minor repairs and always offered a listening ear. Despite his friendly demeanor, Marcus felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, especially when it came to providing for his family. He had worked tirelessly, often sacrificing personal time to ensure that his wife and 2 children had everything they needed. Tanya Johnson, his wife, was the heartbeat of their family. A passionate elementary school teacher, she devoted her life to shaping young minds and advocating for equality in education. Tanya had experienced the challenges of racial bias firsthand, both as a student and now as an educator. Each day, she fought to create an inclusive environment for her students, hoping to inspire them to rise above the societal barriers that often sought to limit their potential. Tanya's love for her family was evident in the way she nurtured their dreams, always encouraging them to reach for the stars. Their eldest child, Jaden, was a bright and ambitious 16-year-old. With dreams of becoming an architect, he often spent his weekends sketching designs for buildings and homes. Jaden was determined to break the cycle of hardship that his family had endured. He studied hard in school, hoping to earn a scholarship to a prestigious university. Despite his dedication, he was acutely aware of the challenges he would face as a young black man in a predominantly white industry. He often found solace in his art, pouring his dreams onto paper, envisioning a future where he could build spaces that embraced diversity and community. Then there was Aaliyah, the youngest at just 10 years old. Aaliyah was full of life, with an infectious laugh that could light up a room. She looked up to her older brother and often spent hours trying to emulate his drawings. Aaliyah had a kind heart and a fierce spirit, often standing up for her friends when they faced bullying at school. She was passionate about justice and equality, often asking her parents challenging questions about the world around her. Aaliyah was the glue that held the family together, her innocent perspective reminding them of the beauty that still existed amid adversity. The Johnson family's dream of homeownership was finally within reach. After years of saving, they had scraped together enough for a down payment on a charming house in a quiet neighborhood. The moment they saw that for sale sign in front of the blue 2-story house, they knew it was meant to be theirs. The backyard had plenty of space for Aaliyah to play and for Marcus to host summer barbecues with friends and family. The kitchen had room for Tanya to whip up her famous recipes while Jaden envisioned a dedicated study space for his architectural designs. With excitement bubbling in their hearts, they scheduled a meeting with Mr. Stevens, the real estate agent. As they walked through the front door of the house, they could almost hear the laughter and warmth of family gatherings. But as soon as they met Mr. Stevens, that excitement began to wane. His dismissive attitude toward them felt like a cold splash of reality against their dreams. That initial meeting with Mr. Stevens became a defining moment for the Johnson family. As they stood there, their dreams teetering on the brink of reality, they faced a harsh truth that they had always known but hoped to escape. Society was still riddled with prejudice, and the color of their skin could dictate their opportunities. Yet, within that uncertainty, a fierce determination ignited. They knew they had come too far to let someone like Mr. Stevens deny them the home they had worked so hard to achieve. As they walked back to their car, Marcus and Tanya exchanged glances filled with unspoken words. Jaden, frustrated and upset, clenched his fists. And Aaliyah, ever the bright spark, attempted to lighten the mood by joking about how they could turn the backyard into a mini amusement park. In that moment, the Johnson family understood that their fight was just beginning. They would not only fight for their home but for the dignity and respect that every family deserved, regardless of their race. United by their love and unwavering hope, they vowed to confront the challenges ahead with resilience and determination. The day of the meeting with Mr. Stevens arrived with a crispness in the air that made Marcus feel hopeful. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow on the neighborhood. The Johnson family dressed in their best clothes, each one aware of the significance of this moment. They climbed into their aging SUV, excitement and anticipation buzzing through the air. "Remember, we're not just here to see the house. We're here to claim our future," Marcus said, glancing back at his family, who nodded in agreement. As they approached the house, Jaden's heart raced with exhilaration. He could almost envision himself sketching the design of his first architectural project from a window in this very house. Aaliyah leaned out the window, her eyes wide with wonder at the beautiful blue facade adorned with white shutters. Tanya smiled at her children, imagining the memories they would create within those walls. Arriving at the property, they were greeted by Mr. Stevens, a tall man with slicked back hair and an air of arrogance. Dressed in a tailored suit, he exuded confidence, but it didn't take long for the Johnsons to sense an underlying disdain as he eyed them from head to toe. "Welcome. I'm Mr. Stevens, your real estate agent. Please come in," he said, his voice smooth but lacking warmth. As they entered the house, the atmosphere shifted. The interior was just as charming as the outside, with sunlight flooding the spacious living room and a cozy fireplace that begged for family gatherings. However, Marcus and Tanya exchanged worried glances as they sensed Mr. Stevens' body language. He seemed more interested in showcasing the house's features to potential buyers than welcoming the Johnson family. "Let me show you the kitchen," he said, leading them through the open floor plan. "It's perfect for entertaining." He opened the fridge and gestured towards the countertop, but his tone felt off. The warmth and excitement that typically accompanied a home tour were conspicuously absent. As they moved through the rooms, Marcus tried to focus on the house, but every time he caught Mr. Stevens' eye, he felt an unspoken judgment lingering in the air. The agent would occasionally make comments about the neighborhood, often emphasizing how diverse it had become. It felt patronizing, as if he were attempting to validate their presence in a space where they weren't entirely welcome. "Is there a park nearby?" Tanya asked, trying to steer the conversation toward the community aspects of the neighborhood. "Oh, there's a small park a few blocks away," Mr. Stevens replied, barely looking up from his clipboard. "But I'm not sure it's safe for families like yours." His tone was dismissive, the implication behind his words striking a painful chord in the Johnsons' hearts. Marcus' stomach twisted with anger, but he kept his composure. "What do you mean by families like ours?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with a hint of confrontation. Mr. Stevens turned to face him, a smug expression plastered on his face. "You know, families with different backgrounds?" His words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, the insensitivity seeping into the atmosphere. Tanya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "We're just as deserving of a safe neighborhood as anyone else," she said firmly, meeting Mr. Stevens' gaze. "Our children should have the same opportunities." Mr. Stevens rolled his eyes slightly, as if her words were irrelevant to him. "Sure, but it's not just about safety, it's about how the neighborhood has changed. You might find it difficult to fit in." The tension in the room escalated. Jaden clenched his fists, trying to suppress his frustration, while Aaliyah shifted uncomfortably, sensing the strain in the air. "Look, we're not asking for special treatment. We're simply interested in a home," Marcus stated, his voice rising slightly. "We've worked hard for this, and we're willing to put down a solid offer." Mr. Stevens smirked, brushing off Marcus' statement. "Well, there are other interested buyers. You might want to consider looking elsewhere," he replied dismissively, as if their interest was an inconvenience to him. The Johnsons felt a mix of emotions swirling within them: anger, disappointment, and disbelief. How could someone so callous be responsible for helping families find homes? The dream they had nurtured for so long was suddenly slipping away. "Mr. Stevens, we'd like to see the backyard," Tanya said, determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She hoped that stepping outside would alleviate the tension and remind them of the beauty of the house. "Fine," Mr. Stevens replied, his tone indifferent as he led them through the back door. The backyard was spacious, with a wooden deck that promised summer barbecues and laughter. The sight sparked a glimmer of hope in the Johnsons' hearts, but that glimmer was quickly overshadowed by Mr. Stevens' dismissive comments. "Imagine how much upkeep this would require. Not everyone can handle it," he remarked, casting a sidelong glance at them. It felt as if he were throwing insults veiled as concern. Marcus stepped forward, his frustration boiling over. "We're fully capable of maintaining a home. We want this house, and we deserve to be treated with respect throughout this process." Mr. Stevens shrugged, his expression unbothered. "It's your decision. Just know that the market is competitive, and if you want to make an offer, you'll need to act quickly. But I doubt the sellers will be impressed." With that, he turned on his heel and walked back inside the house, leaving the Johnsons standing in the yard, a mixture of disbelief and anger swirling within them. Jaden broke the silence, his voice trembling. "Why does he think he can treat us like this? We have every right to be here." His frustration mirrored the feelings building in his parents. "He's just a racist," Marcus said, trying to stay composed. "We can't let him ruin this for us. We'll find a way to make our voices heard." As they re-entered the house, Tanya took a deep breath. "We're not giving up. We have to keep fighting for our place in this community," she said, her resolve firm despite the weight of the encounter. The meeting ended with a sense of unease hanging in the air, a cloud of prejudice threatening to overshadow their dreams. The Johnsons walked out of the house feeling defeated, but deep down, they were determined to fight back against the injustice they had faced. As they climbed into their SUV, Aaliyah broke the silence. "Mom? Dad, can we get ice cream?" Her innocent request sparked a small smile on Marcus' face. "Sure, sweetie," he replied, grateful for her attempt to lighten the mood. "But first, let's talk about how we can deal with Mr. Stevens. We can't let him get away with this." As they drove to the ice cream shop, the family discussed their next steps, brainstorming ways to confront the agent's blatant discrimination. They talked about reaching out to other real estate agents and exploring their options for filing complaints. The idea of taking a stand filled them with renewed hope. "Maybe we should find out if other families have had similar experiences," Jaden suggested, his earlier anger now transformed into a sense of purpose. "If this is happening to us, it could be happening to others too." "Exactly," Tanya agreed. "If we can gather enough evidence, we can hold him accountable. This isn't just about us, it's about everyone who deserves fair treatment." As they enjoyed their ice cream, they felt a flicker of unity. They were a family bound by love and resilience, and they would fight for their dreams together. The following days became a whirlwind of research and networking. The Johnsons reached out to community organizations focused on housing rights and racial discrimination. They attended local meetings and connected with other families who shared their experiences. With each conversation, their resolve strengthened. They learned about legal protections against housing discrimination and discovered stories of families who had successfully challenged biased agents. Armed with knowledge and a growing sense of community, they began to see a path forward. As they delved deeper into their efforts, the Johnsons realized that this was more than just a fight for a home. It was a fight for dignity and respect. They were determined to not only secure their dream house but also to stand up for those who had faced similar struggles in silence. As the family prepared to confront Mr. Stevens once more, they felt a newfound sense of empowerment. They were ready to face the challenges ahead, united by their commitment to justice and equality. The following week, the Johnson family decided to confront Mr. Stevens directly. They had gathered evidence of his discriminatory behavior and were determined to hold him accountable. With a sense of purpose, they arranged another meeting, this time with the hope of making him face the reality of his actions. As they approached the real estate office, Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their mission. The air was thick with tension, and he could sense the anxiety radiating from his family. Tanya reached over, squeezing his hand. "We can do this," she whispered, her voice steady. "We're fighting for ourselves and for everyone else who's been treated unfairly." Once inside, they were greeted by the receptionist, who informed them that Mr. Stevens was expecting them. The family took a seat in the waiting area, their hearts pounding. Jaden flipped through a magazine, trying to distract himself, while Aaliyah doodled on a piece of paper. Tanya's eyes darted around the room, landing on the real estate posters adorning the walls, depicting happy families in front of their new homes. The images felt like taunts, reminders of what they were fighting for. "Johnson family?" Mr. Stevens called out, his tone casual as he stepped into the waiting area. He wore a forced smile, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "Ready to discuss your offer?" "Yes, we'd like to talk about more than just the offer," Marcus said firmly, standing to meet the agent. "We need to address your behavior from our last meeting." Mr. Stevens raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. "Behavior? I'm not sure what you mean. I was simply doing my job." "You were dismissive and condescending," Tanya interjected, her voice unwavering. "You made it clear that you didn't believe we belonged in that neighborhood. That's not just unprofessional, it's discriminatory." Mr. Stevens shrugged, a smirk forming on his lips. "Look, the market is tough. I have to ensure my clients understand the realities of the neighborhood. You know it's changing, right?" "Changing? Or just becoming less welcoming?" Jaden added, his voice rising. "You made assumptions about us based on the color of our skin. You're treating us differently because of it. Let's be real, kid. Not everyone can handle the dynamics of a neighborhood like this." Mr. Stevens shot back, his arrogance on full display. "I'm just looking out for you and your family." "Looking out for us?" Marcus echoed incredulously. "It sounds more like you're looking out for your own prejudices." "We're not asking for a favor, we're demanding respect." "Respect is earned," Mr. Stevens replied coolly. "And frankly, I don't see how you've earned it in this market. Families like yours tend to have difficulty fitting in. You might want to lower your expectations." The Johnsons felt a rush of anger at his condescending tone. It was as if he was judging their worth based solely on superficial characteristics rather than their capabilities or character. Tanya took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "We have evidence of your discriminatory tactics," she stated, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "We've spoken to other families who've faced similar experiences with you." Mr. Stevens scoffed. "You think you can take me down with a few hearsay stories? This is a competitive market. I've been in this business for years. I know how to get a deal done, and frankly, I don't need to justify my methods to anyone." "Your methods are not just questionable, they're illegal," Marcus said, his anger simmering just below the surface. "We've researched housing discrimination laws, and what you're doing is against the law. You're perpetuating a system of inequality." Mr. Stevens shifted uncomfortably, the confidence in his posture faltering for a brief moment. "You're just misunderstanding the market dynamics," he insisted, though there was a hint of unease in his voice. "Misunderstanding? No, we understand perfectly well," Tanya interjected. "You're using your position to enforce bias, which is unacceptable. We are prepared to take action if this continues." "What are you going to do? File a complaint?" "That'll get you nowhere," Mr. Stevens replied dismissively, but there was an underlying nervousness creeping into his voice. The Johnsons exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. They were united in their mission, and they refused to back down. "We will file a complaint," Marcus said firmly. "We will not stand for your actions any longer. Not only for ourselves but for every family who has been treated unjustly." "Good luck with that," Mr. Stevens replied, but the confidence in his tone had waned. He could see that the Johnsons were serious and that they had done their homework. The family left the meeting feeling a mix of anger and determination. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to confront the system and fight for their right to a home. They began to gather their evidence, documenting their encounters with Mr. Stevens and reaching out to other families who had faced similar issues. As they connected with more families, the Johnsons discovered that they were not alone. They heard stories of individuals who had been denied housing or faced insurmountable barriers simply because of the color of their skin. Each story fueled their resolve, deepening their understanding of the systemic racism embedded in the real estate industry. One family they spoke with, the Garcias, had been searching for a home for nearly a year. They had faced similar discriminatory remarks from agents who refused to show them properties in certain neighborhoods. The Johnsons learned that the Garcias had ultimately decided to take legal action against their agent, a courageous move that inspired the Johnsons to consider their own options. With each new connection, the Johnsons felt a sense of community growing. They began organizing a support group for families facing housing discrimination, determined to amplify their voices and demand change. They met weekly to strategize and share resources, cultivating a network of support that transcended their individual struggles. Meanwhile, Mr. Stevens began to notice the shift. Rumors spread throughout the local real estate community about the Johnsons and their newfound activism. He felt the pressure mounting as he realized that his actions could have consequences beyond what he had initially considered. One afternoon, while preparing for a community meeting, Tanya received an email from a local housing advocacy organization. They had learned about the Johnsons' situation and wanted to offer their support. The organization provided resources, legal advice, and connections to other families who had successfully challenged discriminatory practices. "Look at this," Tanya exclaimed, gathering her family around the kitchen table. "We have the backing of a local advocacy group. They're willing to help us with our case against Mr. Stevens." The family felt a surge of hope as they began to see a way forward. They worked diligently with the advocacy group to prepare their case, collecting evidence and documenting every interaction with Mr. Stevens. They also reached out to other families in the community, gathering testimonials and stories that echoed their own experiences. As the weeks passed, the Johnsons felt a growing sense of empowerment. They had transformed their anger into action, and with each step they took, they felt the weight of their fight for justice lifting slightly. They were no longer just a family seeking a home. They had become advocates for change. The day finally arrived for them to present their findings to the local housing authority. With a mixture of nerves and excitement, the Johnson family gathered their documentation, stories, and evidence to make their case against Mr. Stevens. "Are we ready for this?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but tinged with anticipation. "Absolutely," Tanya replied, her determination evident. "We're fighting not just for ourselves but for everyone who has faced discrimination." As they entered the housing authority building, the gravity of the moment hit them. They were about to confront the very system that had perpetuated the biases they faced. The room was filled with representatives from various organizations, eager to hear their stories. When it was their turn to speak, Tanya stood before the assembly, her heart racing. "Thank you for allowing us to present our case. We are here to talk about the discrimination we faced from Mr. Stevens and to advocate for a fair housing market for all families." As she shared their experiences, she felt the support of her family behind her. Marcus, Jaden, and Aaliyah stood strong, their presence a testament to their unity. The room was silent, with all eyes on them, absorbing the weight of their story. They detailed the encounters they had with Mr. Stevens, highlighting his condescending remarks and blatant disregard for their right to a home. They shared the stories of other families who had experienced similar discrimination, weaving a narrative of resilience and determination. As they concluded their presentation, they felt a sense of accomplishment wash over them. They had taken a stand against injustice, and in doing so, they had empowered themselves and others. The room erupted in applause, a chorus of support ringing out for the Johnsons and the families they represented. In the following weeks, the Johnsons received updates from the Housing Authority. Investigations were underway, and Mr. Stevens would face scrutiny for his actions. The community rallied around them, further amplifying their message and creating a movement for change. The Johnsons knew that their fight wasn't over, but they felt invigorated by the progress they had made. They had become more than just a family searching for a home. They had become advocates for justice and equality in their community. With each passing day, they continued to work towards their goal of finding a home. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but they were determined to confront those obstacles together, united by their shared dream and commitment to fighting for what was right. As the Johnsons left the Housing Authority building, a mix of frustration and determination settled over them. They had faced the harsh reality of systemic discrimination, but they also felt a flicker of hope. They had spoken out against Mr. Stevens and taken a stand for what was right. The applause from the audience echoed in their minds, a reminder that they were not alone in their fight. In the car, Aaliyah broke the silence. "Do you think we'll get to move into that house?" Her innocent question pierced the air, bringing the weight of their struggle back to the forefront. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting his daughter's hopeful eyes. "We're going to do everything we can to make that happen, sweetie. We're not giving up on our dream." Tanya nodded, her own determination evident. "We've already taken a big step by speaking out. We're working with people who can help us. We just need to stay focused and keep pushing forward." As they drove home, the streets blurred past them, a physical manifestation of their journey. The path to their future felt both daunting and exhilarating. The idea of a new home lingered in their minds, a symbol of hope amid the turmoil. Once home, the family gathered around the kitchen table, the heart of their household. Tanya pulled out their notes and evidence from the meeting, spreading them across the table. "Let's review everything we've gathered," she suggested. "We need to stay organized, especially if we want to take further action." Jaden leaned forward, eager to contribute. "I've spoken to a few friends at school about what we're doing. They're really interested in helping us spread the word," he said. "If we can get more people involved, maybe we can make a bigger impact." "That's a great idea, Jaden," Marcus replied, feeling a swell of pride for his son. "We need to show that this isn't just our fight. It's a community issue." With renewed energy, they worked late into the night, brainstorming ways to mobilize their community. They created flyers outlining their story and the issue of housing discrimination, inviting families to share their experiences. It was a small step, but they felt empowered by the idea of raising awareness. In the days that followed, the Johnsons continued to gather stories from their neighbors and other families who had faced discrimination. They organized a community meeting, hoping to create a platform for others to share their experiences and stand together against injustice. As the meeting approached, however, frustration loomed. Despite their efforts, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that sometimes crept in. The reality of their situation weighed heavily on him. What if no one shows up? He mused one evening, running his fingers through his hair in agitation. What if this all falls flat? Tanya placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We have to believe that people care, Marcus. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and effort. We're planting seeds, and with patience, they'll grow." "But it feels so slow," Marcus replied, his voice heavy with doubt. "Every time I think about the house, I can't help but feel frustrated. Why should we have to fight so hard just to be treated fairly?" His words resonated with Tanya, who understood the burden he carried. "It's not fair," she agreed, "but we can't lose sight of our goal. Each story we gather, each person who stands with us, brings us closer to change. We have to keep moving forward, even when it feels difficult." The day of the community meeting arrived, and the Johnsons prepared nervously. They decorated the local community center with banners and posters, their stories displayed prominently for all to see. As families began to trickle in, the atmosphere shifted from anxiety to hope. Marcus welcomed each family, offering warm smiles and genuine gratitude. The room quickly filled with voices, mothers, fathers, children, all eager to share their stories. Each account added weight to the gathering, reinforcing the importance of their cause. Tales of struggle, frustration, and resilience echoed through the space, weaving a tapestry of shared experiences. As the meeting progressed, Tanya took the stage, her heart pounding. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice steady. "We're here because we believe that everyone deserves a fair chance at finding a home. Each of you has faced challenges that should not exist in our community, and together, we can bring about change." Applause erupted from the audience, a wave of encouragement washing over her. As Tanya spoke, she could see nods of agreement and determination on the faces in the crowd. She highlighted the importance of standing together, emphasizing that they were not just fighting for themselves but for future generations who should not have to endure the same injustices. "I know it's frustrating," she continued, "but our strength lies in unity. We have to raise our voices and demand change, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who deserves a chance to thrive." After her speech, families began sharing their experiences. The stories poured out like a river, each one echoing the Johnsons' own struggles. A young mother spoke of her attempts to find a safe neighborhood for her children, only to be met with rejection because of her background. A father recounted how he was denied housing despite being qualified financially, simply because of his race. As the stories unfolded, the Johnsons felt their frustration morph into a powerful determination. They could see the impact of their efforts, and with each account shared, the sense of community deepened. They were not just a group of individuals fighting against discrimination, they were a collective force bound by their shared experiences. As the meeting drew to a close, Jaden took the stage, nervous yet eager to share. "I just want to say that we can't let anyone tell us we don't belong," he said, his voice trembling but strong. "We have to keep fighting, and we have to support each other. We are here and we matter." His words resonated throughout the room, igniting a fire within those present. They left the meeting feeling inspired, their resolve solidified by the collective experiences they had shared. The Johnsons knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger movement, one that would continue to grow and gather momentum. Over the next few weeks, they remained committed to their cause, rallying more families and building connections with local advocacy groups. The community began to take notice, with media outlets covering their story and shining a light on the issue of housing discrimination. More families came forward, eager to share their experiences and join the fight for justice. But the road was not without its challenges. As the movement gained traction, the Johnsons faced backlash from some community members who felt threatened by their activism. They received anonymous messages and social media comments that attempted to undermine their efforts, but each instance only fueled their determination. "We can't let this discourage us," Tanya said one evening as they sat together, discussing the negativity they had encountered. "This is what happens when you challenge the status quo. We have to keep pushing forward and show them that we're not afraid." Marcus nodded in agreement, the fire in his eyes rekindled. "We've come too far to back down now. We have a responsibility to our children and to the community. We can't let fear silence our voices." As the movement gained momentum, they began organizing peaceful protests, rallies, and educational workshops to spread awareness about housing discrimination. Each event drew larger crowds, a testament to the community's growing support. The Johnsons felt a sense of pride knowing they were at the forefront of this change, leading the charge for equality. The family continued to meet with the Housing Authority, advocating for policy changes and greater accountability for real estate agents. They connected with local politicians, urging them to address the issue of housing discrimination in their agendas. Slowly but surely, they began to see progress. Finally, the day arrived for a public hearing where they would present their findings to the city council. The Johnsons felt a mix of nerves and excitement as they prepared to share their story on a larger platform. This was their chance to demand change and hold individuals like Mr. Stevens accountable. As they entered the council chamber, the weight of their mission pressed heavily on their shoulders. The room was filled with officials, community members, and supporters who had rallied behind their cause. The air buzzed with anticipation as the Johnsons took their place at the front, ready to present their case. When it was their turn to speak, Tanya stood confidently, sharing their story and the stories of others who had faced discrimination. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her as she passionately articulated the need for change. "We cannot allow discrimination to dictate who belongs in our communities," she asserted. "Every family deserves the opportunity to find a home without facing bias or prejudice." As she concluded her speech, the room erupted in applause. The Johnsons felt a surge of hope, knowing that they had reached the hearts of those present. They had transformed their frustration into determination, uniting the community to fight against injustice. After the hearing, the council members pledged to address the issue of housing discrimination and promised to work towards creating policies that would ensure fairness and equality in the housing market. The Johnsons left the chamber feeling victorious, their efforts having made a tangible impact. Though the journey ahead would still be filled with challenges, they knew they had sparked a movement that would continue to grow. They had turned their frustration into determination, not just for themselves, but for every family who had ever felt marginalized or unwelcome. As they drove home that evening, the Johnsons felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced their fears and stood up against injustice, united as a family. And while their dream of a new home was still within reach, they knew their true legacy would be the change they inspired in their community. As the Johnson family continued to rally support for their cause, the neighborhood around them began to take notice. Among their neighbors was Mr. Thompson, a retired schoolteacher in his late 60s, known for his warmth and wisdom. He lived just a few houses down from the Johnsons and had always been a quiet presence in the community. With his gray hair neatly combed and his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, Mr. Thompson seemed like the kind of neighbor everyone wished they had, friendly, approachable, and ever ready with a kind word or a helpful gesture. Though Mr. Thompson had spent much of his life in the neighborhood, he often felt out of place amid the rapid changes that had swept through the community in recent years. He had watched families come and go, often lamenting the loss of the close-knit community he had cherished. However, he had always made an effort to welcome newcomers, believing that a strong community was built on relationships and understanding. On the day the Johnsons first moved in, Mr. Thompson had been out watering his garden. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice steady. "We're here because we believe that everyone deserves a fair chance at finding a home. Each of you has faced challenges that should not exist in our community, and together, we can bring about change." Applause erupted from the audience, a wave of encouragement washing over her. As Tanya spoke, she could see nods of agreement and determination on the faces in the crowd. She highlighted the importance of standing together, emphasizing that they were not just fighting for themselves but for future generations who should not have to endure the same injustices. "I know it's frustrating," she continued, "but our strength lies in unity. We have to raise our voices and demand change, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who deserves a chance to thrive." After her speech, families began sharing their experiences. The stories poured out like a river, each one echoing the Johnsons' own struggles. A young mother spoke of her attempts to find a safe neighborhood for her children, only to be met with rejection because of her background. A father recounted how he was denied housing despite being qualified financially, simply because of his race. As the stories unfolded, the Johnsons felt their frustration morph into a powerful determination. They could see the impact of their efforts, and with each account shared, the sense of community deepened. They were not just a group of individuals fighting against discrimination, they were a collective force bound by their shared experiences. As the meeting drew to a close, Jaden took the stage, nervous yet eager to share. "I just want to say that we can't let anyone tell us we don't belong," he said, his voice trembling but strong. "We have to keep fighting, and we have to support each other. We are here and we matter." His words resonated throughout the room, igniting a fire within those present. They left the meeting feeling inspired, their resolve solidified by the collective experiences they had shared. The Johnsons knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger movement, one that would continue to grow and gather momentum. Over the next few weeks, they remained committed to their cause, rallying more families and building connections with local advocacy groups. The community began to take notice, with media outlets covering their story and shining a light on the issue of housing discrimination. More families came forward, eager to share their experiences and join the fight for justice. But the road was not without its challenges. As the movement gained traction, the Johnsons faced backlash from some community members who felt threatened by their activism. They received anonymous messages and social media comments that attempted to undermine their efforts, but each instance only fueled their determination. "We can't let this discourage us," Tanya said one evening as they sat together, discussing the negativity they had encountered. "This is what happens when you challenge the status quo. We have to keep pushing forward and show them that we're not afraid." Marcus nodded in agreement, the fire in his eyes rekindled. "We've come too far to back down now. We have a responsibility to our children and to the community. We can't let fear silence our voices." As the movement gained momentum, they began organizing peaceful protests, rallies, and educational workshops to spread awareness about housing discrimination. Each event drew larger crowds, a testament to the community's growing support. The Johnsons felt a sense of pride knowing they were at the forefront of this change, leading the charge for equality. The family continued to meet with the housing authority, advocating for policy changes and greater accountability for real estate agents. They connected with local politicians, urging them to address the issue of housing discrimination in their agendas. Slowly but surely, they began to see progress. Finally, the day arrived for a public hearing where they would present their findings to the city council. The Johnsons felt a mix of nerves and excitement as they prepared to share their story on a larger platform. This was their chance to demand change and hold individuals like Mr. Stevens accountable. As they entered the council chamber, the weight of their mission pressed heavily on their shoulders. The room was filled with officials, community members, and supporters who had rallied behind their cause. The air buzzed with anticipation as the Johnsons took their place at the front, ready to present their case. When it was their turn to speak, Tanya stood confidently, sharing their story and the stories of others who had faced discrimination. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her as she passionately articulated the need for change. "We cannot allow discrimination to dictate who belongs in our communities," she asserted. "Every family deserves the opportunity to find a home without facing bias or prejudice." As she concluded her speech, the room erupted in applause. The Johnsons felt a surge of hope, knowing that they had reached the hearts of those present. They had transformed their frustration into determination, uniting the community to fight against injustice. After the hearing, the council members pledged to address the issue of housing discrimination and promised to work towards creating policies that would ensure fairness and equality in the housing market. The Johnsons left the chamber feeling victorious, their efforts having made a tangible impact. Though the journey ahead would still be filled with challenges, they knew they had sparked a movement that would continue to grow. They had turned their frustration into determination, not just for themselves, but for every family who had ever felt marginalized or unwelcome. As they drove home that evening, the Johnsons felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced their fears and stood up against injustice, united as a family. And while their dream of a new home was still within reach, they knew their true legacy would be the change they inspired in their community. As the Johnson family continued to rally support for their cause, the neighborhood around them began to take notice. Among their neighbors was Mr. Thompson, a retired schoolteacher in his late 60s, known for his warmth and wisdom. He lived just a few houses down from the Johnsons and had always been a quiet presence in the community. With his gray hair neatly combed and his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, Mr. Thompson seemed like the kind of neighbor everyone wished they had, friendly, approachable, and ever ready with a kind word or a helpful gesture. Though Mr. Thompson had spent much of his life in the neighborhood, he often felt out of place amid the rapid changes that had swept through the community in recent years. He had watched families come and go, often lamenting the loss of the close-knit community he had cherished. However, he had always made an effort to welcome newcomers, believing that a strong community was built on relationships and understanding. On the day the Johnsons first moved in, Mr. Thompson had been out watering his garden. He attended their community meetings, encouraged others to share their stories, and worked tirelessly to ensure that everyone's voices were heard. The Johnsons knew they had found not just a neighbor but a true ally, someone who believed in their cause and was willing to fight alongside them. In a world filled with challenges and uncertainties, Mr. Thompson represented the possibility of unity and support. The Johnsons understood that their fight against discrimination was not just theirs alone. It was a fight that resonated with many. With the support of their neighbor and the growing community around them, they felt emboldened to continue their journey toward justice and equality. As the weeks rolled by, Mr. Thompson found himself increasingly drawn into the Johnson family struggle. Their plight resonated with him deeply, reminding him of the battles he had witnessed during his years as an educator. He had always believed in the power of community and the importance of standing up for what was right. But the more he learned about the Johnson situation, the more troubled he became. Mr. Thompson's evenings were often spent reading through the documents the Johnsons had collected, evidence of discriminatory practices and stories from other families who had faced similar issues. He could feel the weight of their struggle pressing down on him, and each account of unfair treatment fueled his determination to help them fight back. Yet, he also sensed the toll it was taking on the Johnson family. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson was in his garden, pruning his roses when he noticed Marcus pacing back and forth in front of his house. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. As Marcus's silhouette moved back and forth, Mr. Thompson's heart sank. It was clear that something was troubling him. After finishing with the roses, Mr. Thompson decided to take a break and approached Marcus. "Hey there, Marcus. Everything all right?" he called out, leaning against the fence. Marcus stopped, visibly startled but quickly recovering. "Oh, hey, Mr. Thompson. Just thinking," he replied, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Mind if I join you?" Mr. Thompson asked, stepping closer. "You look like you could use someone to talk to?" Marcus hesitated for a moment but then nodded, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Sure, I'd appreciate that." As they settled onto a bench in the Johnsons' front yard, Marcus began to open up about the frustrations weighing on his mind. I feel like we're fighting against a brick wall sometimes," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Every time we make progress, it seems like there's another setback." Mr. Thompson nodded, understanding all too well the frustration of fighting an uphill battle. Change often feels slow, especially when it involves deep-rooted issues like discrimination. But remember, you're not alone in this. You have a community behind you. "I know, but it's hard to stay positive when the stakes are so high," Marcus continued, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not just about us, it's about making a better future for our kids. I want them to grow up in a neighborhood where they feel safe and welcomed, not one where they have to worry about being treated unfairly." Mr. Thompson felt a pang of sympathy for Marcus. He could see how much the struggle weighed on him. "You're doing important work, Marcus. And you're setting a great example for your kids. They're watching you fight for what's right, and that will leave a lasting impact on them." Marcus sighed, leaning back against the bench. "I just wish it didn't have to be this hard. I never imagined moving into a new home would come with this level of stress." "Believe me, I understand," Mr. Thompson replied, his own memories flooding back to the days when he first moved to the neighborhood. "When I first arrived here, I faced my own challenges. It took time, but we built a community that looked out for one another. That's what you're doing now, planting the seeds for a better future." As they spoke, the sun dipped lower, casting a golden hue across the neighborhood. Mr. Thompson could see the determination flickering in Marcus's eyes, but he also recognized the exhaustion beneath the surface. He knew that the fight against discrimination was not just about confronting one agent. It was a systemic issue that needed collective action. In the following days, Mr. Thompson noticed changes in the Johnson household. The atmosphere was more tense than ever, filled with late-night discussions and planning sessions. The family was determined to mobilize the community, but it seemed to be taking a toll on their emotional well-being. One evening, Mr. Thompson decided to invite the Johnsons over for dinner. He thought a night of comfort food and camaraderie could help ease their burdens. As they gathered around his dining table, he served up a hearty meal, hoping to create a warm and welcoming environment. "Thank you for having us, Mr. Thompson," Tanya said, genuine appreciation shining in her eyes. "We've been so caught up in everything. It's nice to take a break for a moment." Mr. Thompson smiled. "You're always welcome here. I want you to feel at home. Besides, we could all use a little bit of comfort food now and then." As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed naturally, a mix of laughter and heartfelt discussions. But Mr. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the surface, the Johnsons were still carrying their burdens. After dinner, as they sipped coffee, Mr. Thompson broached the subject. "I've been thinking a lot about what you all are going through. It's essential to take care of yourselves while fighting this fight. It's a marathon, not a sprint." Tanya nodded, though her expression was heavy. "I know we need to pace ourselves, but every day feels like a battle. We want to make a difference, but the stress is getting to us." Marcus chimed in, "I worry about the kids too. They're picking up on our tension, and I don't want them to feel the weight of this struggle." Mr. Thompson's heart ached for them. It's understandable to feel overwhelmed, but you need to find moments to recharge. Family time, laughter, those are what will keep you grounded. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and the Johnsons shared stories from their day-to-day lives. As the evening progressed, Mr. Thompson could see their spirits lift. The warmth of shared meals and camaraderie offered them a brief reprieve from the pressures they faced. However, as the days turned into weeks, Mr. Thompson's concern for the Johnsons grew. He could sense their mounting stress, especially as they faced pushback from some neighbors who were resistant to change. Anonymous notes began appearing in their mailbox, filled with derogatory comments and threats that made their fight feel even more isolating. One afternoon, while tending to his garden, Mr. Thompson spotted Marcus and Tanya walking down the street, their heads bent low, visibly distressed. He could feel a surge of concern bubbling up inside him. Without hesitation, he set aside his gardening tools and walked toward them. "Is everything okay?" he asked, noticing the tension etched on their faces. Tanya glanced up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We received another note. This time it was worse. It's like they're trying to intimidate us into silence." Marcus's jaw tightened. "It's infuriating. We're trying to create a safe space for our family, and yet we're met with hate. It makes me question if it's even worth it." Mr. Thompson placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I understand how hard this is, but giving in to fear only lets them win. You have to stay strong. You have support in your community. Not everyone feels this way." Tanya took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We know, but it's hard when you're facing hostility. We just want to feel safe." Mr. Thompson offered a small smile, hoping to provide comfort. "You are safe here, and you're not alone in this fight. Let's organize a community gathering to stand in solidarity with you. It's time to show the strength of our neighborhood." As they continued to talk, Mr. Thompson felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the Johnsons needed more than just sympathy, they needed action. And he was determined to help them rally the community together in support. Over the next few days, Mr. Thompson began planning the gathering, reaching out to neighbors and local organizations. He put together a flyer that highlighted the importance of community support and invited everyone to join in solidarity against discrimination. As he distributed the flyers, he felt a mix of hope and trepidation. Would the community respond positively? As the day of the gathering approached, Mr. Thompson's anticipation grew. He hoped that the Johnsons would see the support they so desperately needed. They had endured so much, and he wanted to be a catalyst for change, reminding them that they were not alone. When the day finally arrived, Mr. Thompson stood at the front of the community center, looking out at the crowd that had gathered. Families, friends, and supporters filled the room, a sea of diverse faces united in purpose. He could see the Johnsons at the back, their expressions a mixture of surprise and gratitude. As he took the stage, Mr. Thompson felt a swell of emotion. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "We are here to stand together against discrimination and to support our neighbors, the Johnson family. Their fight is our fight. Together, we can create a community that embraces diversity and promotes equality." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Mr. Thompson could see the Johnsons beaming with pride. They had found allies, and in that moment, their determination felt renewed. They were no longer just fighting for themselves. They were part of a larger movement, one that would echo throughout their neighborhood. As the gathering continued, the Johnsons felt a weight lift off their shoulders. The support of their community was palpable, and Mr. Thompson's leadership had ignited a fire in their hearts. Together, they would confront the challenges ahead, not as individuals but as a unified force. As the gathering drew to a close, the air was electric with a renewed sense of purpose. Mr. Thompson watched as the Johnson family interacted with their neighbors, laughter and animated discussions filling the room. The support they received was overwhelming, and it was clear that the tide was turning in their favor. Yet, beneath the surface, Mr. Thompson felt an urgent need to do more. After the event, he returned home, a whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. The Johnsons had fought bravely against the prejudice they faced, but he knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Their recent experiences had shown him that they were not just battling an individual real estate agent, they were confronting a system entrenched in discrimination and bias. That evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun set, Mr. Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to take a stand. The Johnsons had ignited something within him. a sense of responsibility to protect not only their rights but the rights of all families facing discrimination in the community. He had been a quiet observer for too long, but now it was time to become an active participant in the fight for justice. In the days that followed, Mr. Thompson began to formulate a plan. He reached out to local advocacy groups, researching resources and strategies to combat discrimination. He learned about the importance of documenting incidents, building a network of support, and organizing campaigns to raise awareness. With each conversation and piece of information, his resolve solidified. One evening, he invited the Johnsons over for tea. As they settled into their familiar spots around his kitchen table, Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, ready to share his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what's been happening," he began, looking at both Marcus and Tanya. "It's clear that you're facing significant challenges, and I want to help you in a more impactful way." Tanya leaned forward, curiosity lighting up her face. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to organize a neighborhood coalition, a group dedicated to fighting discrimination and supporting families like yours," Mr. Thompson explained. "This isn't just about you, it's about creating a safe and inclusive environment for everyone in our community." Marcus exchanged a glance with Tanya, the weight of Mr. Thompson's words sinking in. "That sounds incredible, but I worry about the backlash. We've already faced so much hostility." Mr. Thompson nodded, acknowledging the validity of Marcus's concerns. "I understand, but we can't let fear dictate our actions. The more we stand together, the stronger we become. We need to show that discrimination will not be tolerated in our community." As they discussed the logistics, the excitement grew. Mr. Thompson outlined a plan to host a series of meetings, inviting neighbors and community members to share their stories and experiences. He envisioned a space where people could come together, share resources, and strategize on how to address discrimination in a constructive manner. "I believe that by standing united, we can create real change," Mr. Thompson emphasized. "It's not just about fighting against one individual, it's about changing the narrative for everyone who has faced discrimination." Tanya and Marcus felt a flicker of hope. The idea of forming a coalition sparked a renewed sense of determination within them. They were no longer just passive victims of circumstance. They could become agents of change. "We're in," Marcus said, his voice filled with conviction. "Let's do this." Over the next few weeks, Mr. Thompson and the Johnsons worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They created flyers to spread the word about the upcoming meetings, emphasizing the importance of unity and the need for a collective response to discrimination. They reached out to local organizations, inviting them to join the coalition and provide resources and support. As the date of the first meeting approached, the excitement was palpable. Mr. Thompson's heart raced with anticipation. Would people show up? Would they be willing to share their stories and join the fight? On the evening of the meeting, the community center buzzed with energy. Neighbors filed in, filling the chairs set up in a circle. The Johnsons greeted everyone with warm smiles, feeling the weight of their struggle shared among others. Mr. Thompson took a moment to observe the faces around him. Each person had their own story, their own battle against prejudice and bias. As the meeting commenced, Mr. Thompson welcomed everyone, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "Thank you all for being here tonight. We gather not just to share our experiences but to forge a path forward together. Discrimination has no place in our community, and it's time we take a stand." As the evening unfolded, individuals began to share their stories, tales of exclusion, bias, and moments that left them feeling marginalized. Each account resonated deeply, forming an unbreakable bond among those present. Mr. Thompson listened intently, nodding in understanding as they voiced their pain and frustrations. Tanya spoke passionately about her family's experiences with the real estate agent, detailing the microaggressions and outright hostility they had faced. "We thought moving into this neighborhood would be a fresh start," she said, her voice quivering with emotion. "But instead, we've encountered walls of discrimination. We're here to break those walls down." The room erupted in supportive applause, the solidarity palpable. People began to voice their commitment to standing with the Johnson family, pledging to confront discrimination and ensure that no one else had to endure what they had faced. Mr. Thompson felt a surge of pride as he watched the community come together. This was more than just a coalition. It was a movement, a collective desire for change that would ripple through the neighborhood. As the meeting came to a close, Mr. Thompson knew that this was just the beginning. The coalition had been born, and with it, a new sense of hope for the Johnson family and everyone who had gathered that night. Together, they would fight against discrimination, standing strong in their conviction that change was not just possible but within reach. The Johnsons looked at Mr. Thompson, their gratitude evident. They had not only found an ally in their fight but also a community that believed in their cause. The weight of their struggle felt a little lighter, knowing they had supporters by their side. Mr. Thompson smiled, feeling the warmth of unity enveloping them. "This is just the start," he said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Together, we will make a difference." As the coalition began to take shape, Mr. Thompson felt an invigorating sense of purpose. The support from the community was palpable, and their shared determination to combat discrimination renewed hope for the Johnsons. However, he knew that to effectively confront the agent responsible for the family's distress, they needed to dig deeper into his history. Over the following weeks, the coalition held regular meetings, during which they not only shared their personal experiences but also strategized on how to tackle the systemic issues plaguing their community. Mr. Thompson took it upon himself to research the background of the real estate agent, Mr. Stevens, hoping to uncover any patterns of discrimination that might strengthen their case. One evening, after a long day of work, Mr. Thompson settled into his home office, surrounded by papers and a flickering desk lamp. He spent hours scouring public records, online forums, and local news articles. As he pieced together the puzzle of Mr. Stevens's career, a troubling picture began to emerge. It didn't take long for him to find references to past complaints lodged against Stevens. His reputation in the real estate community was marred by accusations of discrimination, often targeting families of color. Several former clients recounted their experiences in online reviews, describing how Stevens had discouraged them from purchasing homes in certain neighborhoods based solely on their race. He had a history of misrepresentation, telling potential buyers that properties were no longer available when they were, in fact, still on the market. Mr. Thompson's heart raced as he continued to uncover more details. He found a local news article from several years prior that detailed a lawsuit brought against Stevens by a black couple who had tried to purchase their first home. The couple claimed that Stevens had intentionally steered them away from desirable properties and provided false information about mortgage options. They eventually won the case, but not without a lengthy battle that took an emotional toll on them. The article highlighted not only Stevens's questionable practices but also the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to persist. Despite the lawsuit, Stevens remained in business, a testament to the challenges faced by families seeking justice in the face of discrimination. Realizing the significance of his findings, Mr. Thompson quickly arranged a meeting with the coalition. They gathered in the community center, anticipation filling the air as he prepared to share what he had learned. As he stood at the front of the room, he could feel the collective tension of those who had gathered. The Johnsons were present, their expressions a mix of hope and apprehension. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Thompson began, addressing the group. "Tonight, I want to talk about our opponent, the real estate agent we're up against, Mr. Stevens. I've been doing some digging and what I found is alarming." He laid out the information he had uncovered, detailing Stevens's history of discriminatory practices. As he recounted the lawsuit and the complaints from former clients, a murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. The faces of the coalition members turned from shock to anger as they processed the revelations. Tanya's eyes widened as she listened. "I can't believe this. He's been doing this for years and hasn't faced any real consequences." Mr. Thompson nodded gravely. "It seems that way. The system has failed to hold him accountable, but we can't let this continue. We need to expose his actions and show that we won't tolerate discrimination in our community." Marcus leaned forward, determination etched across his face. "What can we do? We need to gather more evidence and make sure people know who he really is." Mr. Thompson agreed, his mind racing with ideas. "We should start by reaching out to those who have previously worked with him. If we can gather testimonials and documentation of his past actions, it will strengthen our case significantly. We can also leverage social media and local news outlets to raise awareness." The coalition members rallied around the idea, each offering to take on specific tasks. Some volunteered to reach out to former clients of Stevens, while others planned to draft a press release highlighting the issue. The energy in the room shifted from disbelief to action, and Mr. Thompson felt a surge of hope. They were no longer passive observers, they were taking control of their narrative. In the days that followed, the coalition worked tirelessly. They reached out to individuals who had previously dealt with Stevens, collecting testimonials and documenting their experiences. The stories poured in: families who had been steered away from homes they loved, parents who had faced hostility during open houses, and couples who had felt unwelcome in neighborhoods they dreamed of calling home. One poignant story stood out to Mr. Thompson: a single mother named Lisa who had been searching for a safe place for her children to grow up. She recounted how Stevens had dismissed her inquiries about a lovely home in a predominantly white neighborhood, claiming it was not the right fit for her family. When she pressed him for more information, he became increasingly condescending, eventually telling her that she might have better luck elsewhere. Feeling the weight of her experiences, Mr. Thompson invited Lisa to speak at the next coalition meeting. He wanted her voice to be heard, to add authenticity and urgency to their cause. When she arrived, he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm not sure if my story matters," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It matters more than you know," Mr. Thompson replied, his tone steady. "Your experience is part of a larger pattern, and together, we can amplify it. You have the power to help others who may be facing the same challenges." As Lisa shared her story with the coalition, the room was filled with emotion. Her words resonated deeply, and it was evident that she had touched a nerve. The members listened intently, nodding in understanding as she recounted her struggles. "I just wanted a safe place for my kids," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "Instead, I felt like I was fighting an uphill battle just to be treated with respect." Her vulnerability and strength galvanized the coalition. After her speech, a wave of solidarity swept through the room. Members expressed their admiration for Lisa's bravery and their commitment to standing alongside her and the Johnsons in this fight. With each story they gathered, the coalition grew stronger, more united in their resolve to confront the agent's actions head-on. They began to create a comprehensive report outlining Stevens's history, documenting the testimonies and evidence they had collected. This would serve as a powerful tool when they approached local media and advocacy organizations. As they prepared to go public, Mr. Thompson felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. They were about to shine a spotlight on the discriminatory practices that had been allowed to persist for far too long. It was a pivotal moment, one that could create waves in the community and beyond. On the day they planned to present their findings to the media, Mr. Thompson gathered the coalition at the community center. He could sense the nervous energy in the room, but also the determination that fueled their collective spirit. "Today, we stand as one," he said, looking around at the faces filled with purpose. "We will not back down. Together, we can challenge the status quo and demand change." As they prepared to face the cameras, Mr. Thompson felt a rush of pride. They were no longer just a group of individuals. They were a movement, fighting for justice and equality. The weight of their shared experiences would carry them forward, and together, they would ensure that the voices of those who had been silenced would finally be heard. The day of the confrontation had finally arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Mr. Thompson had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, fueled by the stories shared within the coalition. They had gathered compelling evidence of Mr. Stevens's discriminatory practices, and now it was time to face him directly. The stakes were high, but so was their resolve. As he drove to the local real estate office, Mr. Thompson felt a mix of nerves and determination. His heart raced as he recalled the countless testimonials they had collected, stories of families wronged by the agent's bias tactics. The coalition had carefully crafted a letter outlining their findings, which they intended to present not only to Mr. Stevens but also to the local media and community leaders. Upon arriving, he parked outside the unassuming office building, the sign overhead reading Stevens Real Estate. He took a moment to collect his thoughts, envisioning the confrontation he was about to initiate. In the days leading up to this meeting, he had rehearsed what he would say, wanting to ensure that he remained calm and collected, despite the potential volatility of the situation. As he stepped inside, the office buzzed with activity. Mr. Stevens sat behind a polished desk, poring over paperwork. Mr. Thompson approached the front desk, where a receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "Hello, I'm here to see Mr. Stevens," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. The receptionist, slightly taken aback by the serious tone in his voice, quickly buzzed Mr. Stevens. "You have a visitor, Mr. Stevens," she announced, her eyes darting curiously between Mr. Thompson and her boss. "Send him in," Mr. Stevens replied, his voice booming with authority. As Mr. Thompson entered the office, he immediately felt the weight of the room's tension. The air was thick with an unspoken animosity. Mr. Stevens looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as he recognized the visitor. "What can I do for you today?" he asked, attempting to project an air of casual indifference. Mr. Thompson squared his shoulders, drawing on the strength of his coalition and the families who had suffered at Stevens's hands. "I'm here to talk about your business practices, Mr. Stevens," he said, meeting the agent's gaze with unwavering conviction. Stevens leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "My business practices? That's quite a broad topic. What exactly do you have in mind?" Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, pulling out the folder containing their compiled evidence. "I have here testimonies from several families, including the Johnsons, detailing your discriminatory tactics. Families who have sought your services only to be turned away based on the color of their skin." The smirk faded from Stevens's face, replaced by a thin veneer of irritation. "Is that so? You really think a few disgruntled clients are going to tarnish my reputation? I've been in this business for years." Mr. Thompson pressed on, undeterred by Stevens's dismissive attitude. "It's not just a few clients. There are patterns of behavior that can no longer be ignored. We've documented instances where you've misrepresented properties and actively discouraged families from pursuing their dreams based solely on racial bias. This is not just bad business, it's illegal." As Mr. Thompson laid out the evidence, he watched as Stevens's demeanor shifted. The agent's confidence began to waver, and for a moment, the facade cracked. "You're making a big mistake, Thompson," Stevens warned, his voice laced with menace. "You think you can come in here and change anything? You're just a neighbor playing vigilante." "I'm not playing vigilante," Mr. Thompson shot back. "I'm standing up for what's right. Your actions have consequences, and the community will not allow you to continue operating under these practices." The tension in the room thickened as Stevens stood up, leaning across the desk. "You don't know what you're getting into. I have connections, resources, you're just a small-time neighbor trying to play hero." Mr. Thompson met Stevens's glare with unwavering determination. "And I have the community behind me. We're organized, we're united, and we're ready to expose you for what you are. You can't intimidate me, and you certainly can't intimidate the families you've wronged." Stevens chuckled, a harsh sound that echoed in the office. "You think your little coalition can take me down? You're in over your head. People like you are always looking for a villain, but the truth is, you don't understand the business. I'm just doing my job." "No," Mr. Thompson asserted firmly, "you're not just doing your job. You're perpetuating a cycle of discrimination and fear. That's not what this community stands for, and we will not tolerate it." In that moment, Mr. Thompson saw a flicker of vulnerability in Stevens's eyes, a brief realization that he was no longer in control. Encouraged by this shift, he continued, "We have gathered enough evidence to file formal complaints and go to the media. This is bigger than just you. It's about accountability. Families deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, and they will no longer stand by while you profit from their pain." Stevens's expression hardened, his bravado returning. "You really think you can just waltz in here and make demands? You'll regret this, Thompson. I'll make sure your little crusade goes nowhere." Mr. Thompson felt a surge of defiance as he stood his ground. "You can try, but the coalition will only grow stronger. You may have gotten away with this in the past, but things are changing. We're committed to standing up against discrimination, and we won't back down." The confrontation reached a boiling point, both men standing firm in their convictions. Mr. Thompson could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, fueled by the stories of families who had suffered at Stevens's hands. The coalition had become a symbol of hope, and he was determined to see their efforts through to the end. As the tension in the room hung heavy, Mr. Thompson took a step back, realizing that the confrontation was not only about him and Stevens, it was about every family who had faced injustice. "We will be presenting our findings to the community and the media soon," he said, his voice steady. "And when we do, you'll be held accountable for your actions." With that, he turned to leave, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. The confrontation may not have resulted in immediate change, but it had sent a clear message. The community was no longer willing to tolerate discrimination, and they were ready to fight back. As he walked out of the office, Mr. Thompson felt a surge of hope. He had faced the agent directly, and although the outcome was uncertain, he knew he had taken a significant step forward. The coalition was poised to make an impact, and together, they would continue to stand against injustice. Back at the community center, Mr. Thompson shared the details of the confrontation with the coalition members. They listened intently, their expressions a mixture of concern and determination. "What's next?" Tanya asked, her voice filled with resolve. "Next, we prepare to go public," Mr. Thompson replied, feeling the energy in the room shift. "We need to gather our testimonies, prepare our report, and rally the community. It's time to shine a light on Stevens's actions and demand accountability." The members rallied around him, their spirits lifted by the confrontation and the promise of change. They had faced the agent, and now it was time to take the fight to the next level. Together, they would ensure that their voices were heard and that justice would prevail. In the weeks following the confrontation, the coalition worked tirelessly to bring attention to Mr. Stevens's discriminatory practices. They compiled a comprehensive report detailing the testimonies they had gathered, presenting irrefutable evidence of the agent's past actions. The plan was clear: they would hold him accountable not just to their community, but to the wider public. The coalition decided to organize a community forum where they would present their findings. The event was scheduled for a Friday evening at the local community center, a space that had become a symbol of unity and resilience for the neighborhood. They invited community leaders, local media, and residents to attend, knowing that their collective voice could affect change. As the day of the forum approached, anticipation buzzed through the air. Flyers had been distributed, and social media posts circulated, calling for community support. Mr. Thompson, buoyed by the enthusiasm of his neighbors, felt a sense of purpose like never before. The coalition had gained traction, and the tide was beginning to turn against Stevens. On the evening of the forum, the community center overflowed with people. Neighbors filled the seats, while others stood at the back, eager to hear what was being presented. Mr. Thompson stood at the front, flanked by coalition members, ready to share the hard work they had put into exposing Stevens's behavior. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Mr. Thompson began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We stand here united, ready to confront a deep-rooted issue that has plagued our community for far too long: discrimination in housing. Tonight, we will share our findings on Mr. Stevens and the harmful practices that have affected families in our neighborhood." As he spoke, the room buzzed with energy. The coalition members shared personal testimonies, recounting their experiences with Stevens, while others presented the evidence they had gathered. The atmosphere shifted from one of uncertainty to empowerment as the audience absorbed the information. Gasps and murmurs of disbelief punctuated the presentation, fueling the urgency of their cause. At the back of the room, Mr. Stevens sat quietly, his presence overshadowed by the mounting evidence against him. He had arrived to gauge the situation, perhaps hoping to dismiss it as nothing more than a few disgruntled neighbors. But as the coalition continued to present their case, the realization began to settle in: his reputation was on the line. The media coverage of the event was significant, with local news outlets sending reporters to cover the unfolding drama. Cameras flashed as Mr. Thompson and the coalition shared their experiences, making it clear that they were not going to back down. The story spread quickly, garnering public interest and sympathy for the families who had suffered at Stevens's hands. In the days that followed, the fallout began. The news of the coalition's efforts reached the local real estate board, prompting an investigation into Stevens's practices. Complaints began pouring in from former clients who had been silenced by fear, and many were emboldened by the coalition's bravery. The stories they had once kept to themselves now found a platform, and Mr. Stevens's actions were scrutinized under a harsh light. As investigations unfolded, the local real estate board suspended Stevens's license pending further review. The consequences of his discriminatory behavior became increasingly severe. He was no longer just facing the ire of a few angry neighbors. He was up against a well-organized coalition backed by public opinion. His once unassailable position was crumbling, and the consequences of his actions were becoming painfully clear. One afternoon, as Mr. Thompson sat at home catching up on the news, he stumbled across an article detailing the investigation into Stevens. The headline read, "Real Estate Agent Faces Investigation After Discrimination Allegations." The article outlined the evidence gathered by the coalition, emphasizing the numerous testimonies that had emerged in the wake of the forum. Mr. Thompson couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as he read through the accounts of families who had finally found their voice. However, with the escalating investigation, the stress began to weigh heavily on Stevens. Reports surfaced about his growing anxiety and the financial implications of losing his real estate license. The community's outcry had reached a crescendo, and Stevens found himself cornered, unable to escape the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, the coalition continued to mobilize, organizing additional events to raise awareness about housing discrimination and advocate for fair practices in their community. They partnered with local advocacy organizations, amplifying their message and further solidifying their united front against discrimination. The coalition's efforts had ignited a broader conversation about equity in housing, prompting community members to reflect on their values and take a stand against prejudice. As the investigation into Stevens deepened, several former clients came forward, sharing their experiences in the media. One such client, a woman named Karen, spoke passionately about how Stevens had discouraged her from pursuing a home she had fallen in love with, claiming it wasn't right for her. Karen recounted how his condescending tone and dismissive attitude had left her feeling unwelcome and undervalued. "I thought I was imagining things at the time," Karen said in a televised interview. "But when I heard about the coalition and the experiences of others, I realized I wasn't alone." Stevens's behavior is not just an isolated incident. It's part of a larger problem that affects our community. These testimonials resonated widely, and the momentum continued to build against Stevens. As more families shared their stories, the pressure intensified. He became the face of discrimination in the real estate industry, and the community's resolve only strengthened. Eventually, the local real estate board completed their investigation. They concluded that Stevens had indeed engaged in discriminatory practices that violated fair housing laws. The board issued a public statement, announcing that Stevens's real estate license would be permanently revoked. The consequences of his actions had come crashing down, leaving him without a livelihood and a tarnished reputation. News of Stevens's downfall spread quickly through the community. Many felt a sense of relief, knowing that justice had been served. The coalition celebrated their hard-fought victory, but they knew this was just the beginning. They had successfully exposed the discrimination that had plagued their community, but the fight for equality in housing was far from over. At a subsequent coalition meeting, Mr. Thompson addressed the group, his voice filled with pride. "We've achieved something remarkable. Our efforts have led to real change in our community, and we've shown that when we stand together, we can make a difference." As the group celebrated, the impact of their actions began to ripple through the community. More families felt empowered to speak out against discrimination, and local organizations dedicated to advocating for fair housing saw a surge in support. The coalition had ignited a movement, sparking conversations about equity, representation, and the importance of community engagement. Though the journey had been fraught with challenges, the coalition emerged stronger and more united than ever. They had faced a powerful adversary and brought him to justice. The victory was a testament to their resilience and determination, reminding them all that change was possible when they stood together. In the aftermath of Stevens's downfall, Mr. Thompson and the coalition turned their attention toward educating the community about fair housing laws. They organized workshops, invited guest speakers, and partnered with legal advocates to ensure that families were informed about their rights. The coalition had transformed from a group of neighbors into a formidable force for change, dedicated to ensuring that discrimination would no longer be tolerated in their community. As for Mr. Stevens, the consequences of his actions lingered. He had lost not only his career but also the trust of the community he had once exploited. With his reputation shattered and no longer able to operate in real estate, he was left to reflect on the choices that had led him down this path. His story became a cautionary tale for others in the industry, emphasizing the need for accountability and ethical practices. The coalition's journey had begun with the Johnson family's struggle, but it evolved into a movement that championed fairness and justice. Their story became one of hope, resilience, and the unwavering belief that, together, they could create a better future for all. As the dust settled on the coalition's triumph over Mr. Stevens, the community began to heal and rebuild. The victory over discrimination had sparked a renewed sense of hope and solidarity among residents. For many, this was more than just a win. It was a turning point in their lives and the lives of their children. In the weeks following Stevens's downfall, Mr. Thompson organized a community celebration to commemorate their success. The event was held at the local park, where families gathered to share food, stories, and laughter. Banners were hung, and the air was filled with music and the aroma of barbecued treats. The community had come together to celebrate not only their victory over injustice but also their shared commitment to fostering a more inclusive and equitable environment. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the festivities, Mr. Thompson took to the makeshift stage. He looked out at the familiar faces of his neighbors, feeling a swell of gratitude and pride. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "What we've achieved together is nothing short of remarkable. We've shown that our community will not stand idly by in the face of discrimination." Cheers erupted from the crowd, and a wave of applause followed. It was a moment of celebration, but also a moment of reflection. Mr. Thompson continued, "This journey has reminded us that our strength lies in unity. Together, we've challenged the status quo, and together, we will ensure that our neighborhood remains a welcoming place for everyone, regardless of their background." As he spoke, he glanced around at the families gathered, recalling the stories that had brought them together. He remembered the Johnsons, whose dream of homeownership had been stifled by Stevens's actions. But now, with the community's support, they were exploring new opportunities, feeling more empowered than ever to pursue their dreams. Their resilience had become a beacon of hope, inspiring others to stand up for what was right. The celebration continued, with families sharing their aspirations for the future. Children played games, and neighbors engaged in heartfelt conversations about the changes they hoped to see in their community. The spirit of camaraderie was palpable, and it reinforced the belief that together they could make a lasting difference. In the weeks that followed the celebration, the coalition's work continued. They remained vigilant, organizing educational workshops and community forums to raise awareness about fair housing laws and the importance of equity in real estate practices. Their efforts not only focused on addressing past injustices but also on preventing future occurrences. The coalition's dedication drew the attention of local media outlets, who featured stories about their ongoing initiatives. Mr. Thompson was invited to speak at various events, sharing their journey and the lessons learned along the way. He emphasized the importance of community engagement and the need for collective action in the face of injustice. One evening, as he prepared for another speaking engagement, Mr. Thompson reflected on how far they had come. He thought about the initial confrontation with Mr. Stevens and the doubts that had crept in during the early days of their efforts. But he also remembered the unwavering support from his neighbors, who had come together with a shared purpose. As the coalition continued to gain momentum, they decided to create a community task force dedicated to monitoring housing practices and advocating for fairness. This task force aimed to ensure that any discriminatory behavior would be reported and addressed swiftly. It was a proactive approach to maintaining the progress they had made and ensuring that their neighborhood remained a safe and inclusive space. With each meeting and workshop, the coalition's impact rippled throughout the community. Residents became more informed about their rights, and the culture of silence that had once prevailed began to dissipate. Families felt empowered to speak out against discrimination, and the once distant dream of equity in housing started to feel like a tangible reality. Meanwhile, Mr. Stevens's situation continued to deteriorate. The fallout from the investigation took a significant toll on his personal life as well. He faced backlash from his peers in the real estate industry, and his name became synonymous with unethical practices. The community had not only rejected him but also held him accountable for his actions. Stevens, once a prominent figure, was now a cautionary tale about the consequences of discrimination. As the months went by, Mr. Thompson found himself increasingly reflective about the journey they had undertaken. He realized that the fight against discrimination was not just about one agent or one family, it was about creating a culture of respect and understanding. It was about standing up for the rights of every individual in their community. One evening, during a quiet moment at home, Mr. Thompson sat down to write a letter to the coalition members. He wanted to express his gratitude and highlight the collective journey they had taken. He penned heartfelt words, acknowledging their commitment to justice and the bonds they had forged along the way. "Dear coalition members," he began, "I want to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude for each of you. What we have achieved together is not just a victory against discrimination, it is a testament to the strength of our community. Your courage and determination inspire me every day, and I am honored to stand alongside you in this fight for justice." As he continued to write, he reflected on the future. "Let us remember that our work is not done. We must remain vigilant and continue to advocate for equity and fairness in our community. Together, we can create a legacy of inclusivity and understanding for generations to come." He signed the letter, feeling a sense of fulfillment. The coalition had become more than just a group of neighbors. They had evolved into a force for change. Their journey was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, unity could bring about remarkable transformation. As the seasons changed and the community continued to flourish, the impact of the coalition's efforts became increasingly evident. Families thrived, and the neighborhood atmosphere shifted toward one of acceptance and support. The stories of those who had suffered discrimination were no longer silenced. Instead, they became powerful narratives of resilience and hope. One afternoon, as Mr. Thompson walked through the park where they had celebrated their victory, he paused to observe the scene around him. Children played, families picnicked, and laughter filled the air. It was a vibrant reminder of what they had fought for, the right for everyone to feel safe and welcome in their own community. In the years to come, the coalition would face new challenges and obstacles, but their foundation of unity would remain strong. They had set a precedent for accountability, and the lessons learned would echo through generations. The spirit of resilience and the fight for justice became an integral part of their community's identity. Reflecting on the journey, Mr. Thompson understood that while the battle against discrimination was ongoing, they had created a model for others to follow. The coalition's efforts had sparked a movement, inspiring neighboring communities to take a stand against injustice and advocate for fairness in housing practices. As he walked home that day, a sense of peace washed over him. They had faced the storm together and emerged stronger. The journey was far from over, but as long as they remained united, there was no limit to the change they could create. Ultimately, the story of Mr. Stevens and the coalition's fight against discrimination became a powerful reminder that individuals have the power to effect change. Through courage, determination, and unity, they could challenge injustice and create a brighter future for all. As we reflect on the journey of the coalition and the powerful stand against discrimination, it's clear that change is possible when we unite for a common cause. The story of Mr. Stevens serves as a stark reminder of the impact of our choices and the importance of holding one another accountable. Together, we can create the community where everyone feels welcome and valued. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that shed light on social issues. Your support helps us spread awareness and ignite conversations about justice and equality. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the coalition's efforts? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in your community? Share your experiences and ideas in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and work together towards a more inclusive future. Thank you for watching, and remember, change starts with us.